is Peter Kleinman, a Holocaust survivor of Auschwitz, Dusseldorf, Gross-Rosen, and Flossenburg. He is also a sponsor of the symposium along with his wife, and together they are active members in the Jewish community. He chaperoned the March of Living in both 1990 and 1992, and is in the process of completing his autobiography, which will soon be finished this year. To my right is Alan Rose. He is the Executive Vice President of the Canadian Jewish Congress. He is member of the Governing Board of the World Jewish Congress, the International Council for Sober Jewry, the boards of the Jewish Material Claims Against Germany Incorporated, and the Memorial Foundation for Jewish Culture. As well, he is a member of the Executive Committee to the Commonwealth Jewish Council. In 1980, Mr. Rose was awarded United States Presidential Citation of Honor as Liberator of Bergen-Belsen. He became a member of the Order of Canada in 1986. He was awarded the Resident Anti-Fascist Fighters Medal by the government of Czechoslovakia in July 1987. He is member of the Board of Directors of the Canadian Human Rights Foundation. Alan Rose will speak first about his experience of liberating the camp, and followed by Mr. Peter Kleinman.
Mr. Chairman, Consul General Tedesca of Poland, Mr. Kleinman, ladies and gentlemen. This is a very difficult thing for me to do this morning, because I think those who saw a concentration camp can never really eradicate it from their mind. And I'd like to just tell you something very briefly about myself, because I never usually talk about myself. It has bearing on what I have to say. I was born in Britain. I lived a typically Anglo-Jewish life, which some of you in this audience can know. That is, my family was once very English in terms of sending me to a public school, in educating me in things English, and very Jewish in that we kept a kosher home, observed the rituals, observed Sabbath, and we're deeply Jewish in our origins and in our outlook. It's something to be Anglo-Jewish. It's a strange mixture, but it exists and has a long history. When I was 17, I really believed that something terrible and evil was going on in Europe. I really didn't know how evil it was, and I joined the British Army. And I served from El Alamein to Mareth, and from Mareth to Mareth line in Tunisia after the collapse of the Axis. With the American 7th Army, we went to Salerno and landed there. And then, so that we should not miss anything, particularly in the war, we were brought back 2 months before D-Day, and I landed in D-Day in Europe and went through the war there. On the 17th of April, the British Study Corps, which I was a lonely member, was advancing in the northwest German plain past the towns of Minden and Hanover to Celle, which is C-E-L-L-E, which is a small town. And I was in the advance guard, and the first indication that I had that there was a camp at Bergen-Belsen, although we had been told that there were some anti-fascist prisoners at Bergen-Belsen by British intelligence, was the overwhelming stench of the camp. And as I drew towards it, there was a scene which is so indescribable that really only a great painter or a great orator could conceive of what it was. There were literally thousands of people, on that spring day, a beautiful spring day, lying out in the grounds of the camp, dead or dying. Thousands and thousands and thousands. Some barely alive, some crawling, some just able to stand, all of them totally skeletal, and surrounding this mass, this barbed wire which we had broken through, and thousands and thousands and countless thousands of dead people. 37,000 people died in Bergen-Belsen after the liberation. And I remember what struck me at the time was that I had a tank driver who was a very excitable fellow, and he saw some of the guards who had surrendered as we came in. We were carrying infantry behind them, and they had put up their hands, their arms, in surrender. And he thought that they should be shot immediately. And he cocked his thing gun, and he was going to shoot them, about 7 of them. And I had to stop him, strangely, because I wanted these people to be tried. I didn't want to happen to them what had often happened to others. Guilty though they were, infamous though they were, they were all in fact hanged, every one of them. They had the trial afterwards. And there was a trial. And I thought it was very important at that time that the process of law, and that they should stand trial in their crimes, which can never be described fully. It should appear that they should be called before the bar of justice and tried. I've got to tell you that in retrospect, when I look back on it, and remember that we were sitting in a tank, and my job was to keep my crew alive after fighting in one for 5 years, and see at the end of the war that we were in one piece. We were turned into Denmark. We arrested the Dönitz government in Schleswig, which is the puppet government of the Nazis set up at the end of World War II, and raced towards Copenhagen. And in Copenhagen, as we were the outskirts of Copenhagen, we were stopped by some Danish resistance people who were pelting flowers and what have you. And I asked them what had happened to the Jewish community. And they said, well, the Jewish community has all been saved. They were taken 6,000 in 1943, 2 years back, across the Baltic to Denmark, from Denmark to Sweden. I always remember at that moment the feeling that I had. Here, 300 miles down the road, there was a Belsen. And 3 miles up the road, there was a Danish people, a noble Danish people, who saved Jews. And I couldn't help but think at that time, as I always have done, of the very existential nature of being Jewish during the Holocaust. I mean, for me and the people I see in this room, Pamela Sachs and others who were in Britain at that time, we didn't realize that we were saved by 20 miles of water and by the RAF, whose vapor trails I used to see, because the RAF, the Royal Air Force, inflicted the first great, massive defeat on the Germans in the Battle of Britain, and Hitler went to Russia, and we were able to fight another day. So I always think, that if my grandparents hadn't come from Estonia, on my father's side, my mother had been in England for a long time, many hundreds of years, that the fate of what happened to the Jews of Europe, of European Europe, of the continent, would have certainly happened to me. And I want to talk just for a minute to you about some of the lessons I think that are important. I don't want to talk about Holocaust denial, and I don't want to talk about the great pathology of the Holocaust that is developed, nor of the conspectus of all its problems. I don't want to talk about the people of close and narrow designs who say that the Holocaust never happened, because this was brilliantly dealt with by other colleagues. But I want to give you a few thoughts that I have. First of all, I want to say, having seen courage, that courage is a very rare thing. I mean, Antoine de Saint-Exupéry said that the most noble form of courage is the courage of the early moon. And I don't know how many of us can put our hand in the fire and say that if there was a Jewish family next door, or Jewish children next door, that we would have protected them, and we would have gone through the camps to torture and to death. There are not many people, I would suggest, could do it. There are not many heroic people, but there were some heroic people, and they shone like a light in the darkness of Nazi Europe. And I want to tell you a story of one of my friends who was a heroic person, Barbara McCook. Barbara McCook was a Polish woman who saved 17 Jewish children, hid them from the Nazis, discovered by the Nazis, was sent to Ravensbrück, was medically experimented on, thank God survived and now is living in this country, was honored as a righteous Gentile amongst the nations by the Israel government. And if you walk through Yad Vashem, you will see hundreds and indeed thousands of names, many of them Polish. And I would like to say, in the presence of the Consul General, a few words about Poland, because I think it's important that people should understand the issues involved. We have to be precise in the history of the Holocaust, otherwise we do great violence to the facts that exist. Poland was occupied by the Nazis on the 1st of January 1939. It had the worst occupation of any country. It never produced a Quisling. It never, for one moment, sided with the Nazis at any time. And whilst there was anti-Semitism in Poland, and nobody denies it, thousands of Poles and organizations like the Zagota saved thousands of Jews, one at a time. And saving a Jew meant absolute death. So there were many, many heroic Poles. And when people say, as a somebody said on the March of the Living the other day, quoted in it, at least, they're going to Maidanek, and what did the people sitting around Maidanek do? The fact of the matter is that there were no Polish civilians sitting around Maidanek because the Germans evacuated all the civilians in areas where concentration camps. And what should they do? I mean, who can say again with their hand in the fire, who would stand up to Nazis? Who would stand up to the SS? Because if you stood up to it, your chance of going to Auschwitz and into the flames was very great. But in spite of that, Poles did it. And in the uprising of the Home Army in 1942, the Polish army was allowed to be defeated by the Nazis, whilst the Soviet army did not. So I think it's very important to understand that the Poles suffered as we do. Millions of Poles were killed. The whole Polish intellectual class was wiped out by the Nazis at the beginning of World War II. Polish priests. There was a massacre of the Polish intellectuals and those who made up the leadership of the country. And whilst there was anti-Semitism, there was also recognizing in Poland, which was the scene of the greatest catastrophe of the Holocaust, there were German camps in Poland. There weren't Polish camps. There were German camps in Poland. And there were many heroic Polish people who did everything that they could in the face of disaster. They themselves, many hundreds of thousands, perished in Auschwitz. The other thing that I would like to say is a word or two about Holocaust denial, which was dealt with so well by Erwin Koppelman. In 1981, I was invited to a conference convened by all people by President Reagan in Washington of those who had liberated concentration camps. And it was a very moving conference. We're all older now, and we saw people who we fought side by side. And it was the late President Eisenhower's son, who was a regular soldier in the American Army, who got out, I'll always remember this, this glittering array of people, many of them in uniform, and said, if there were no Holocaust, right, and there were no camps, then all of us here are frauds. And all the testimony that you've heard today is fraudulent. And it is our duty and those who succeed us to see that the story of the Holocaust is told. And that's how I feel about it. I don't think it should be downgraded. I think it has to be seen as the greatest tragedy of this 20th century. But I think as Jews, and this has been the position of the Canadian Jewish Congress, we've also got to be very much alive to other people's tragedies. What happened with Pol Pot, the disaster that has overwhelmed the Muslims of Bosnia, the 101 horrors that we hear of in the Middle East, the disasters and catastrophes in South America, the fight against those who espouse human rights in other parts of the world. So I've always thought, as a Jew, who in a sense survived Hitler, I didn't survive the Holocaust, but I did survive Hitler, because for 5 years the Germans were shooting at me in the tank, that somehow I survived. I thought that I have a number of duties to do, and on this note I'll finish. The first is, I think, that Jews have got two very honourable burdens to bear. They have the burden of being Jewish, and everyone has their own road to Jerusalem. But they also have the burden of advancing the human condition. And I was very proud yesterday when the president of the Canadian Human Rights Foundation, Professor Jordan, not yesterday, a few weeks ago, said that there was not one major issue affecting human rights of Canadians in which the Canadian Jewish Congress, the Canadian of Social Change, has not been involved in. And I look back on that. I mean, we were the first people to stand up for Japanese Canadians in 1942 during the Holocaust, who were unjustly interned. We fought for many, many years and eventually got it for material and moral restitution. We fought for the Fair Employment and Practices Act of 1947, which is the first piece of effective federal legislation. We fought for multiculturalism, for employment equity, for women's rights. A whole multitude of things, visible minorities, which are on the record. And hopefully we've enriched the polity of Canada. I think that those are the things that we have to do as Jews. We have to remember the Holocaust, we have to remember who we are. But above all, we have to remember that we live in a country, and we must advance the human rights of those who live in it. Because in the end, the ultimate security of the Jewish community, it seems to me, rests entirely on the kind of civilized society that we live in. And we must also be mindful of other people's human rights. And it's interesting. The first community that did anything in this country for the Muslims of Bosnia was the Canadian Jewish Congress. We've sent thousands of kilograms of medical supplies to Bosnia. We've seen the Minister of Foreign Affairs and the Secretary of State for External Affairs, as she was, on 5 times. We have been on numerous deputations. We've made representations to the Yugoslav embassy. Our voice has been heard. Our voice was heard more than any other community in this country. And that's as it should be. Because ethnic cleansing is something that Jews cannot watch and stand still. So I want to thank you for inviting me to your seminar today. I'm very happy to have participated in it, and I wanted to share those few thoughts with you. Thank you.
Peter Kleinman.
Good afternoon, all. And I want especially to thank the Consul General from Poland to be here, who I had the pleasure yesterday to meet him. And I had also the pleasure to be in her office when she was there, and I can tell you one thing. Her staff was more than helpful, and I thank you personally for it. I am known as Peter Klein. My name is not Peter. We will go on to that later on. My life started
of the Jewish community, it seems to me, rests entirely on the kind of civilized society that we live in. And we must also be mindful of other people's human rights. And it's interesting. The first community that did anything in this country for the Muslims of Bosnia was the Canadian Jewish Congress. We've sent thousands of kilograms of medical supplies to Bosnia. We've seen the Minister of Foreign Affairs and the Secretary of State for External Affairs, as she was, on 5 times. We have been on numerous deputations. We've made representations to the Yugoslav embassy. Our voice has been heard. Our voice was heard more than any other community in this country. And that's as it should be. Because ethnic cleansing is something that Jews cannot watch and stand still. So I want to thank you for inviting me to your seminar today. I'm very happy to have participated in it, and I wanted to share those few thoughts with you. Thank you.